Hi everyone, welcome to the MRP Tech Podcast. This is episode 189. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. And we are fast approaching episode 200 of the podcast. And with that, I'd like to talk a lot about the past this week and some of the things that I'm working on in the future. So, to start off, if you are relatively new to the podcast, okay, my website, mrptechreviews.com, is sort of the home base for this podcast. And I've been doing the podcast since about 2016. When I first started, if you go back and listen to episode 1, 2, 3, and 4, it was sort of an experiment, and I wasn't totally expecting to get past episode 10, to be quite honest with you. The reason I started a podcast is I had an interest in technology topics, and I had an interest in helping people. I really wanted to review some devices. I wanted to get new things into my hand. I really wanted to learn a lot about the technology world and what's happening. I was a really big fan of Linux and Apple and Windows, so it didn't really matter to me what the topic was. And I realized that I already had all of the equipment because I'm a professional musician and music teacher. And one of the things that I have is I have a couple of professional bands, and I had the sound equipment already available to me, the microphone and the USB connections to a computer because of other things that I'm working on. And so very quickly, the podcast thing came to be. Now, it's actually kind of funny because if you go back and listen to episode 1, you'll hear me call it the MrpTech podcast. And I never once had the intention of calling it that. My last name is Prey. So, and, you know, students at school will call me Mr. Prey. But the funny thing is, I never, ever once had the intention of calling it the Mr. P Tech Podcast at all. It was always MRP Tech Podcast, and those are my initials. And the funny thing about getting behind a microphone is you say funny things sometimes, and you don't really intend to say the things. And the idea of the Mr. P Tech Podcast was something that I was figuring somebody was going to confuse at some point with the name of this podcast. And it works both ways, but the real name, MRP, is my initials. And if you want to go back and listen to any of the older episodes, number one, you can go to my website, mrptechreviews.com, and click the subscribe button on the website. That's going to give you a link to subscribe via RSS feed. So if you have a podcast app that you use, that's the easiest way to subscribe to the podcast, and I invite you all to do that. We also have a Discord chat room that is a whole lot of fun, and I really want to stress again, if you are a listener of the show and you've been listening for a long time, or if this is your first episode, join us over in my Discord room, because half, if not 3/4 of the fun of putting this podcast together is the interaction in the Discord room. We have Door-to-Door Geek. We have a lot of other active members in the group, and I would love to hear from listeners on a more regular basis. And if you don't want to email me, one of the ways you can always get in touch with me is through the chat room. And I just wanted to throw that out there for all of you joining me for the first time to look at our Discord chat room and join in. It's a lot of fun. That room is active 24/7, and we have contributors from all over the world who are popping in and saying hello there. Speaking of old episodes, if you want to go back and listen to some old episodes, if you go to podnuts.com and go under shows to the MRP Tech Podcast, you'll have all of the shows going back to when I joined the podcast, the Podnuts Tech Podcast Network. And I joined about episode 33. So we've been part of Podnuts for a long time, and I really appreciate everything that they do for me as far as putting the podcast together. I basically put the show together, and I I will I'll edit it myself, and then I send it off to them, and they publish it for me, and they take care of all that stuff. So yeah, we are fast approaching episode 200, and if you have some ideas of what I can do for episode 200, I'd love to hear them. So send me an email, mrptechreviews@gmail.com, and I really want to do something special. I did something special around episode 100, so we're approaching that other milestone. I've been doing this for a while. As I mentioned, episode 1 was way back in 2016, so I'm working on 4 years now, and I don't have plans of stopping anytime soon. If you want to check out the video versions, you can go to my YouTube channel, which you just heard. Was not aware that was going to play because I paused it earlier. Thanks, YouTube. So basically, I'm going to edit that out of the show, by the way. If you go to the YouTube channel, you'll see all the video episodes. I've been doing a sort of enhanced version of the podcast on YouTube. I wouldn't really call it anything special other than it's a video feed of the podcast. But what I really wanted to talk to you all today is I've always been sort of into certain things. I've had as a music teacher, I've always been interested in music. Running a professional jazz orchestra is what I do. And that I've been doing since 2013. I've been teaching since 2005. I've got 15 years experience doing that. So I have a summer job. I'm working outside in a canyon all day long. I've been working there since 2003. And so that's 17 years experience there. And over the last few years, starting with the podcast, I've always had an interest in technology topics. But really, when it comes to the heart of everything, really, I just enjoy providing something different for everyone. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, where you're from. If you're from my hometown, or if you're from nearby, or if you're from far away. Something that I really enjoy doing is helping people. And when it comes to music, the type of music that I provide is something different than other people do. A lot of people put together rock bands or cover bands or that type of thing, or the original singer-songwriters. There's a lot of really great music in my area, local music, but what I do is different. When it comes to the podcast, one of the ideas behind it was, as an educator who put together a school tech club, I want to get my students interested in technology topics, and at the same time, I want to research things myself. I want to learn a little bit myself. And if that helps somebody, that's really awesome. And if I've helped you in the past, people have emailed me and say they appreciate the show. And that sort of gives me motivation to keep going whenever I hear from somebody. And if I've made mistakes along the way, I've made plenty of them. And I'm usually the first to sort of point that out. The thing that always, no matter what I'm doing, seems to be something that I enjoy is the ability to reach out to people, no matter where you are, and help in some insignificant way. Maybe it's a significant way. And whether you're a former student, you're a student of mine now, or you've been listening for this show for years, or just starting out listening, this is your first episode, that's what I'm all about, is trying to provide something different than the other 10 million technology podcasts out there. Now, my goal is never to be the best podcaster in the world. I don't want to be a YouTube star and have 10 million views on videos. That's not my intention. And that's, if you want to do that, that's great. I would rather have a small community of listeners, which we have built up over the last few years. And I wanted to take a second and say thank you for listening to the show. I try to do that on a regular basis. Sometimes I forget. But the whole premise of the MRP Tech Podcast was, it's not a flashy name. There's no reason for it to be This Week in Tech or whatever podcast you listen to. Those are my initials. That's who I am. And those initials have stuck with me a long time. That's my name. That's what I do. So the MRP Tech podcast was a way to reach out to people I didn't know. And over the last few years, I made a lot of great friends doing this podcast. And over the last 2 years specifically with the podcast, I've introduced you to certain parts of my life that I really enjoy. And whether it has been things I've taken a deep dive in with research. I've spoken just a few weeks ago about a month-long project of research in my hometown about saving historic bridges, which I knew nothing about when I started. And I took a deep dive and really researched these topics and brought up these topics with 2 local counties to try to save some historic bridges in my hometown. I've talked to you recently about the whole adventure that I took in March when I was researching a long lost cave that not many people knew about. And all I went off of was one document and took a deep dive to try to locate these caves and where they were. And we actually took 2 trips. And on the second trip, we actually found it after about a month of research. And we're actually going to go back again this weekend, hopefully, and finally go in the caves. We weren't able to go in the caves earlier this year because of hibernation season for bats. So, and I'm going to report back to that soon. But my big thing that I've found that I really enjoyed is research. And I really find that this is something that I'm very good at. Research is something that is very time consuming. It is very tedious at times. And it's not just as simple as going online and finding using a Google to provide answers. And so what I wanted to tell everybody about today is a new venture that I'm starting today. Well, actually, it's last week that I started this, but I wanted to bring it up on the show. And the new venture that I'm taking is a new business that I'm starting. It's called MRP Research Solutions. And MRP Research Solutions is the latest venture that I'm undertaking. It is a business that is set up for a couple of things. Really, it can be anything under the sun. Are you a person who has a family history that you're interested in researching, but you don't have time? Are you a business has a topic that needs to be researched, but you're busy with day-to-day business tasks, and you really don't have time to sit down and do the research on a particular subject? Are you like a local government or a township that's trying to research local history, local lore, that type of thing? These are things that I'm interested in researching. And when I do these types of things, I find that I'm getting very, very good at finding difficult things that I didn't think were quite possible. Going back to like 2017, 2018, I was able to track down a vintage 1989 Topstone Halloween mask. And there was really probably less than 5 that were known to exist sort of at the time. I was able to track down not one, but I was able to track down 2 of them. And this is something that was not easy. It took me about a month and a half, and it was for a sort of a personal project. And again, another side sort of tangent that of something that I was going to do, and we still might do more in the future. Some of you have been watching a while, you probably are aware of that. But anyway, the task of research, not everyone is able to do. Now, some people in the tech world may be pretty good at it. What I've found is that through some tricks that I've learned, I have a means that other people probably don't have. or if they do have, they may not have the time because they have a family life, they work 4 jobs or whatever. The goal of MRP Research Solutions is, again, to help someone. And this is a side project of mine, and it may be slow. It may be one person at a time. It may be one person occasionally. And it's sort of the same thing as this podcast, where if I can help one person or another person, and it doesn't matter where you are, you could be local, you could be far away, I'm willing to help you out. And I'm sticking with the sort of MRP branding on this because the podcast is set up that way. And I want to sort of combine the two of them a little bit, and sort of build a bigger brand for future projects. So I want to sort of pull in the reins here a little bit. And if you noticed, if you follow the Facebook page, I've changed the name from MRP Tech Reviews to MRP Tech Podcast. I've also done the same for the YouTube channel. And the reason for that is the tech reviews part is not really something that I'm interested in anymore. I am interested in reviewing devices, but it was going to be more on the podcast rather than creating YouTube videos. I'll still create videos once in a while and put them on YouTube, but the podcast is what I love doing, and I'm going to stick with that. And so you notice some branding changes on the social media pages. That's why, and sort of sticking to it. So I'm really excited about the MRP Research Solutions, and I've actually have a couple of researchers that are lined up with me that want to help me out. And so if the time comes where it grows, I already have 2 and possibly a third skilled researchers that are ready to jump on board and help me with even larger projects. So we're going to start small, and my goal is, again, to help those in need. And I wanted to bring it up on the show today because if there's anybody out there listening that maybe has a long-lost relative, or maybe something you've always wanted to learn about or research, and you just don't have time, maybe it's a family thing, maybe it's a local history thing where you are, maybe I can help. And so what I'm doing, I'm offering free consultations to anybody who has a topic that they might be interested in. You can meet with me, and basically I'll tell you very plain as day if I think this is something that I can do, or if it's not something I can do, I'll give suggestions. But I will tell you right up front if this is something I think I can do. I'll tell you how much time it will probably take to do. And research is research. You're not going to you may hope for one thing and find that something else crops up that you didn't know about, and it leads you down another path. So there's a lot of different things and a lot of different options, and I'm flexible as far as what it's going to be. So I wanted to put this out there for any listeners, if you've been listening for a long time, and you sort of know my track record by listening to this show, that I've been pretty successful in my research. Now, research can be just about any topic, and what I've always said in this show is the most fun that I've had in this show is when I'm researching a topic that I know absolutely nothing about. One of the things that I researched that I knew nothing about was amateur radio, and now I have the highest license that you can have as an amateur radio operator. I started with knowing absolutely nothing. Another topic I had on the show several months ago, Jeff Stevens, the Atlas missile expert. I met with him several years ago in upstate New York, and we toured an Atlas missile silo. When I started that project, I knew absolutely nothing about Atlas missiles. And I've done at least 4, maybe 5 shows now on Atlas missiles. And it's really fun for me to take a topic I knew nothing about. So before I started this, what I did is I reached out to some friends on social media, and I asked them, give me a topic of something I know nothing about, and I'm going to chew on it for an hour, and I'm going to get back to you, and I'm going to see if this is something that I can do. Well, one of my sort of former colleagues and friend who just recently moved out of the area reached out and said, Matt, I used to live in a house near the Canadian border, and in the house there was a small room under a stairway. It was only accessible to people from the basement. It had a small circular hole in it, and his thought was that it was part of the Underground Railroad system freeing slaves in the 1800s. And there's a lot of Underground Railroad sort of stations, if you would call it. It's not really an Underground Railroad, it's and just more of a route that slaves took to free themselves in the early 1800s. So I said, you know what, this is kind of a neat topic to sort of talk about and to sort of look in. So what I did, I gave myself 1 hour exactly. I wanted to see with this if I could research something that I knew nothing about in 1 hour's time. So I started a clock, I started the timer, and I think it was 6:04 p.m. that I started, and gave myself to exactly 7:04. And so I hit the ground running with this research project. I reached out to Underground Railroad. I sent out messages to not only the Underground Railroad in upstate New York, but also the capital of New York, Albany. I reached out and through some various means, I have access to property owner names. I found 2 or 3 property owners that were used to live at the property. I sent them messages on social media asking them if they knew anything about it. They confirmed that the room was there. The house had been renovated. One of them was very curious themselves what the room was for. Again, it was only accessible through a circular hole in the basement, and you had to go up, and this was a furnished room that was not accessible anywhere in the house. And so I started deep diving. I went into records of the property, when the house was built, when was it last sold. Turns out the house was built in 1888. And so as I'm waiting to hear back from the property owners, I learned a little bit more that there was actually an older structure that was maybe added onto the house, and it was a little bit older than 1888. But it turns out that the house actually was built after the Underground Railroad sort of shut down, which was in 1863. So it sort of, to me, eliminated the possibility of Underground Railroad being involved. And could this be a room that was just sort of added on when they added on the house? It could have very well been. It could have been used for bootlegging or any of those means way back in the 1800s. You never know. But it sort of ruled out the 1800s, or excuse me, sort of ruled out the Underground Railroad portion of what this original friend of mine was originally thinking. And doesn't mean that I was wrong, or doesn't mean, excuse me, that what I did was prove his idea or theory wrong. But in a matter of an hour, I went from knowing little to nothing about the Underground Railroad to finding routes through New York, and through this particular area of New York. The route didn't quite, most popular routes didn't quite go through that area, but a little bit south of there. I've also found out the neighbors, one of the neighbors suspected that it was not Underground Railroad. And so sort of just led me to believe that it was not involved with Underground Railroad, but it could have been other things. And so within 1 hour, I was able to learn a whole lot about this subject. And does that mean that it ruled out the Underground Railroad? Absolutely not. I did not deep dive into this research like I would if this was a project that I was working on. But in 1 hour, I was led down a certain path. When I do research, usually I have 4 or 5 multiple paths going at the same time. And I'm very good at finding details that are overlooked or forgotten about, that type of thing. So I reached out to the friend and told him everything that I found. It was not the news he wanted to hear, but it was what I found in an hour's worth of time. I could have kept going with it, but this was just sort of an experiment. So it kind of stopped there. So it was really fun, actually, to do that. It was really fun to have just an hour of time of looking up something that I knew nothing about. And that's what made me decide that the starting the new business, MRP Research Solutions, is what I wanted to do. It's a way for me to, make a few extra bucks here and there on research projects. Helps me out if I'm helping somebody else out. So it's kind of a really neat thing. So I wanted to bring it up on the show. If you want to have any more information, just send me an email, mrptechreviews@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Coming up in the next few weeks, we're gearing up for episode 200. I'm really looking forward to that. Probably around Christmas time, I would think we would probably hit that. So got about 10 more episodes to go. Maybe before Christmas, we'll see. But I just want to thank you all again for listening to the podcast. I hope you really enjoy it. Now that everything is sort of back up and running again, I'm done my summer work. I'm done the big research project on the historical bridges. Now I'm going to really hit the ground running with the podcast. So thanks so much for listening. We will see you next time.